feel like you're playing a game and someone keeps changing the rules on you? Like you're not even sure what game you're playing anymore.
Yeah, someone moved the goalposts.
Exactly. They didn't even tell you. That feeling, like the rug's been pulled out from under you. It's something we hear a lot, especially when we're talking about relationships and the expectations people bring to them.
Right, those unspoken assumptions we all carry around.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today with this book called The Cunning Cuckoo, How Women Have Forgotten Their Natural Role and Ruined the Workplace for Everyone.
Wow, that title is certainly a bold statement right off the bat.
It really is. No mincing words there. And given your interest in men's rights issues and, the whole idea of covert contracts in marriage, I think this book's premise might really resonate with you.
Yeah, it sounds like it's right up my alley.
So basically, the author, Conrad Riker, argues that this push we've seen for women to abandon traditional roles, like motherhood and homemaking and all that in favor of careers, well, he says it's totally backfired.
He's saying it's created unhappiness for both men and women as a result.
Exactly. He's saying it's messed things up for everyone.
Yeah.
He paints this picture of, like this natural order that's been disrupted, causing tension in families and even in the workplace, which he claims was, designed for more masculine traits.
So he's saying that workplaces are inherently kind of set up for a certain way of being.
Right. And he doesn't hold back on the feminist movement either. He says they're pushing this myth of the strong, independent woman, which ultimately sets women up for unrealistic expectations and even, psychological harm.
Sounds like he's making some pretty sweeping claims.
He is. And we want to be super clear about something before we go any further. We're not here to endorse any of these arguments. Okay?
We're just exploring what the book says.
Exactly. Our goal is to lay out Riker's perspective and,
Yeah.
just present his arguments as he makes them in the book, especially given your interest in these topics.
I appreciate that. It's important to be able to look at different perspectives critically.
Absolutely. So let's start with the foundation of his argument, okay? He dives deep into evolutionary biology, claiming that men and women, well, they evolve for different roles.
He's going back to the very beginning.
He is. He's saying men are the providers and leaders, driven by testosterone, while women are the nurturers and homemakers guided by estrogen.
So it's all about biology in his view.
Yeah, pretty much. And to illustrate this point, he uses some interesting examples. Like he talks about those early hunter-gatherer societies and the division of labor back then. Men would go out and hunt, requiring strength and risk-taking, while women would gather food and take care of the children, which demanded more nurturing and attentiveness.
It's that classic division of roles.
Right, and he doesn't just stop at ancient history. He even gets into the nitty-gritty of brain structure differences, arguing that they support his claims about these inherent differences between men and women in terms of, their capabilities and inclinations.
He's going for a biological basis for everything.
He really is. And to make it even more personal, he shares this vivid anecdote about his own parents.
Yeah.
His father was a blacksmith embodying that, traditional masculinity providing for the family. And his mother was a homemaker, creating a nurturing and stable home environment. He presents this as the ideal model for a successful family structure.
So he's saying, look, this is how it used to be, and it worked.
Exactly. And from there, he launches into this critique of the whole strong, independent woman narrative. He argues that it's not just unrealistic, but it's actually harmful to women.
Interesting. So how does he support that claim?
Well, he tells this story about Sarah, a high-powered lawyer who's constantly stressed out and feeling guilty because she can't seem to balance her demanding career with her desire for a family.
So she's kind of like the poster child for his argument.
Right, like she's living proof that trying to have it all just leaves women feeling empty and unfulfilled.
So what about the women who are genuinely happy with their careers?
He doesn't really address that. He focuses more on the negative example, and then he goes on to target pop culture, bringing up characters like Monica Geller from Friends, who's always longing for a family despite her successful career.
Ah, I see what he's doing there. He's trying to show how pervasive this narrative is.
Exactly. And he uses another example, Olivia Pope from Scandal. She's this powerful woman in a high-stakes job, but often at the expense of her personal happiness.
So he's saying it's not just some abstract, it's ingrained in our culture through the media we consume.
Right. It's woven into the fabric of our lives. And from there, Riker takes us into the workplace, arguing that those accommodations designed to help women actually end up disadvantaging men.
That's a pretty provocative claim.
It is. His main example is maternity leave. He claims that these generous policies, they lead to resentment from male coworkers who don't get the same benefit.
They're picking up the slack.
Yeah. And he says it reinforces this idea that women are meant to be the primary caregivers even when they're trying to break free from those roles.
I can see how that could create tension.
And of course, he brings in his own personal experiences to add weight to his argument. He says he's seen this resentment firsthand in corporate settings.
So he's speaking from what he's observed.
Yeah, it's like he's saying, look, I've seen it with my own eyes. This is real. And This leads into his next point, which is that men are being forced to act like women.
Just in what sense?
Well, he argues that men are being pressured to be more emotional and less assertive, to abandon their natural masculine traits.
To fit into this new mold.
Exactly. And he uses this example of John, a firefighter who embodies traditional masculinity but feels totally lost and confused in a world that seems to devalue those very qualities.
It's like he's saying men are being told to be something they're not.
And that this shift isn't just confusing for men, it's actually detrimental to their sense of self and purpose in the world.
So it's all tied back to his earlier point about the erosion of traditional gender roles.
Right, and how that's having this ripple effect across all areas of life. And finally, he tackles family structure and child development.
Should be interesting.
Yeah. He argues that women working outside the home has led to a decline in the family unit and, negatively impacted children.
So he's going for the traditional family structure argument.
He is. He throws out some pretty stark statistics about, increased divorce rates, the rise of latchkey kids, and behavioral problems in children of working mothers.
To paint a bleak picture.
Right. And then he contrasts that with this couple, Linda and Joe Ramirez, who embraced traditional roles. Linda stayed home with the kids, and Joe was the provider. And guess what? They report increased happiness and stability.
So they're like his model family.
Exactly. It's his proof that the traditional way works.
Okay, so that's a lot to unpack.
It is. We've just scratched the surface of the Cunning Cuckoo. Yeah. But as you can see, it's the book that's definitely stirring the pot.
It's certainly thought-provoking. And given your interest in men's rights and the dynamics of marriage, particularly that whole idea of covert contracts, I think you might find some really interesting food for thought here.
I think so too. Now we've just laid out the basics here. We'll dive deeper into Riker's arguments and what they could mean for you in the next segment.
Sounds good. I'm ready for more.
But for now, if you're intrigued and want to check out the book yourself, you can find The Cunning Cuckoo on Amazon, Kindle, and Google Play Books.
We'll be right back with more from The Cunning Cuckoo.
All right, so we've got the basic rundown of Riker's argument, the foundation. Now let's dig into some of the more, let's say, controversial stuff.
Okay. Sounds good.
Let's get into it.
He spends a good chunk of the book talking about what he calls covert contracts in relationships.
This is where it gets really interesting, especially for our listeners. Given their focus on those hidden dynamics, those unspoken agreements.
Yeah, exactly. Riker's saying these covert contracts are everywhere. These expectations we bring into relationships without even realizing it.
Right. It's like we're operating on assumptions we don't even know we're making. Exactly. And he argues that the shift away from those traditional gender roles, well, it's throwing a wrench in the whole system. Those unspoken agreements get totally disrupted.
So it's like everyone's playing by a different set of rules, but nobody knows what the rules are anymore.
Right. He uses this example of a husband who works long hours, to provide for his family. He expects his wife to handle the home and kids. It's like that classic breadwinner dynamic.
The traditional model.
But then, let's say the wife decides she wants a career too. Suddenly, that unspoken agreement, that covert contract, it goes out the window.
And boom, there's conflict because nobody really agreed on the terms of the new arrangement.
Riker says this leads to tons of resentment because neither partner is getting what they, signed up for. Even though that contract was never actually written down or discussed.
It's like they're speaking different languages, right? They have completely different ideas about how things should work.
And this ties back to his whole belief that men and women are just fundamentally different.
Different in what way?
Well, he's not just talking about the physical differences. He's saying they're different emotionally and psychologically too.
So he's arguing that these differences are innate, baked into our biology, and we can't just ignore them.
Exactly. So then the question becomes, how do we navigate those differences, especially in the context of relationship? Right?
Right, because if we are so different, how do we make it work?
And his answer, well, it's pretty traditional. He advocates for a return to those more traditional roles. Men as the primary providers and protectors. Women focus on nurturing and homemaking.
He's advocating for a pretty clear division of labor there.
He is. And he believes this division of labor is not only natural, but it actually leads to greater happiness and fulfillment for both men and women.
It's like he's saying everyone has their place and things run smoothly when we stick to those roles.
Right. He even goes so far as to say that women who try to act like men in the workplace, well, they end up feeling unfulfilled and unhappy.
Because they're denying their true nature.
Yeah, that's his argument. He uses this example of Susan, a manager who's super tough and unemotional at work, to fit in, but secretly she's yearning for a more nurturing role.
So it's like she's playing a part that doesn't really fit who she is.
Right. Riker's saying this kind of forced conformity leads to all sorts of psychological distress.
So he's contrasting that with women who embrace those traditional roles.
Exactly. He contrasts Susan with Linda, who left her high-powered job to become a stay-at-home mom. And she finds way more fulfillment and contentment in that role.
It's like he's presenting these two paths, and in his view, The traditional path is the one that leads to true happiness, especially for women.
Right. Now, this is where things get a little more controversial.
Yeah.
Okay. He claims that biology plays a huge role, not just in our emotions, but also in our abilities and aptitude for certain types of work.
So he's saying we're biologically predisposed to be good at certain things.
And he really zeroes in on testosterone, in those high-stress work environments. He's saying men with their higher testosterone levels are just better equipped to handle pressure, make tough decisions, and thrive in those competitive fields.
So it's like a biological advantage in his view?
Right. He even makes this bold claim that female airline pilots are more prone to accidents because of their lower testosterone levels.
Whoa, that's a pretty big statement.
Yeah, it definitely is. And it's super important to remember that this is just one perspective, okay?
Right. We're not presenting this as scientific fact.
There's a ton of debate within the scientific community about how much hormones actually impact behavior and performance.
It's a complex issue for sure.
He also talks about how some studies have shown that men might be better at managing stress and making those critical decisions in high-pressure situations, especially like military settings.
So he's drawing on some research to back up his claim.
Right. And he even tells this dramatic story about a male pilot who almost crashes a plane because he's too stubborn to listen to his female co-pilot's warnings.
It's like he's using these anecdotal examples to reinforce his point.
Exactly. And he brings it all back to the media. He argues that the media is constantly bombarding us with these images of strong, independent women who seem to have it all, but then they're often portrayed as unhappy or unfulfilled.
It's that classic you can't have it all message.
Right. He uses those same pop culture examples again, like Olivia Pope, always working, putting her career first, and Monica Geller, who's constantly yearning for a family.
He's saying the media is selling us a lie.
That it's creating this unattainable ideal for women that sets them up for failure and unhappiness.
So he's saying even the media is reinforcing those traditional gender roles, even while pretending to promote female empowerment.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. He gets even more controversial when he starts talking about workplace accommodation.
How so?
Well, he claims that those accommodations designed to help women actually end up victimizing them.
That's a pretty strong statement.
It is. He uses some pretty loaded language, almost like he's suggesting women who need those accommodations are being demanding or entitled.
It sounds like he's walking a fine line there.
He is. He's arguing that these policies, while, well-intentioned, they actually reinforce the idea that women are primarily responsible for caregiving, and they just perpetuate those traditional gender roles, even as women are trying to break free from them.
It's like a catch-22 situation.
Right. His main target is maternity leave. He claims it creates a shortage of women in the workforce, which leads to resentment from male colleagues and ultimately harms women's career prospects.
So it's like a lose-lose situation in his view.
Right. He even cites studies that show women who take longer maternity leaves are more likely to experience career setbacks.
So he's saying those policies are actually holding women back.
It's a super complex issue, with no easy answer. But Riker's perspective definitely challenges that assumption that these accommodations are always beneficial for women.
It's making us question those assumptions.
And he goes even further. He says the focus on accommodating women in the workplace has created this culture where men feel like they're walking on eggshells.
Afraid to say or do the wrong thing.
Exactly. Afraid of being perceived as sexist or offensive. It's like he's saying the pendulum has swung too far in the other direction, and now men are the ones who are feeling marginalized.
So it's like this role reversal in his view.
And this all ties back to his bigger argument about the decline of traditional masculinity and the rise of what he sees as, like a feminist agenda that's hostile to men.
He's painting a pretty bleak picture.
He is. He's arguing that men are being pressured to suppress their natural instincts and conform to this new set of rules that don't feel authentic or fulfilling.
They're losing their sense of self.
And he uses John the firefighter as an example again. This guy who feels completely lost and confused because his traditionally masculine traits aren't valued anymore.
It's like he's saying men are being told to be something they're not.
And he sees this as this huge crisis of masculinity in our society with major implications for relationships, families, and the workplace.
Sounds like he's calling for a pretty big shift in perspective.
He is.
Yeah.
And it gets even deeper. He talks about the psychological cost for women who are working in what he considers, men's roles. He claims they experience higher rates of depression, anxiety, and stress because they're going against their natural inclination.
It's like they're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Exactly. And to illustrate this, he shares an anecdote about Laura, who finds way more happiness and fulfillment after leaving her high-powered job to be a stay-at-home mom.
So it's back to that traditional model again.
He even throws in some statistics about the negative impacts of dual-income households on children, arguing that kids of stay-at-home moms do better academically and emotionally.
It's like he's saying, look, the data proves it. Women are happier and kids are healthier when moms stay home.
It's a very traditionalist view for sure, but he presents it with a lot of conviction, and he uses those anecdotal examples and statistics to back up his claim.
He's building his case piece by piece.
And it really challenges that assumption that having both parents work is always the best option for families.
Right. It's making us question those conventional ideas.
Now, one of the more interesting arguments he makes is about emotional labor.
Oh, this is a big one.
Yeah, it is. He's saying women are often expected to perform this emotional labor in the workplace, and it's not always recognized or valued.
So it's like this invisible burden they carry.
Right. He argues that women are disproportionately burdened with tasks like managing office relationships, mediating conflicts, and providing emotional support to colleagues.
It's like they become the unofficial therapists of the office.
And often it's at the expense of their own work and well-being. He even suggests that this emotional labor is often invisible and undervalued, which contributes to women's higher rates of burnout and stress.
It's like they're doing all this extra work but not getting any credit for it.
He uses this example of a woman who's constantly expected to be the office mom, taking care of everyone's emotional needs, while her own needs are totally ignored.
It's like she's being taken advantage of for her empathy and nurturing skills.
And he argues that this exploitation is harmful to both women and the workplace as a whole.
So it's not just a personal issue, it's a systemic problem.
Right. And he says we need to find ways to recognize and value emotional labor more fairly.
It's about creating a more equitable workplace.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. It's clear that Riker's book is packed with controversial and thought-provoking ideas.
It's definitely a book that challenges your assumptions, makes you think about things in a new way.
And it's especially relevant for our listeners, with their focus on men's rights and that concept of covert.
Riker's work provides a framework for understanding these issues and navigating the complexities of modern relations.
Whether you agree with his conclusions or not, it's important to engage with these ideas.
To consider different perspectives.
Right. To consider the possibility that there might be some truth to his claims.
We'll be back with the final part of our deep dive into the Cunning Cuckoo, where we'll explore some of the potential solutions Riker offers and discuss what all of this means for you.
Okay, so we've spent the last two parts unpacking a lot from the Cunning Cuckoo, and it's been pretty heavy stuff, right? I'm curious now, as someone who's really into men's rights and especially that whole idea of covert contracts, what's kind of resonating with you so far? What's standing out?
I think what really strikes me is how Riker connects those covert contracts to this much bigger, societal shift.
Yeah.
He's arguing that the feminist movement and their allies, like in the media and academia, they're deliberately pushing this agenda that undermines traditional...
It's like they're changing the rules of the game without men even realizing it.
Exactly. He uses this really vivid image. He calls it the long march through the institution.
Long march.
Yeah, it's like the stealth takeover, he says, where feminists and, people who share their ideology, they've infiltrated everything from education to law to entertainment.
Wow, so they're everywhere.
And he's saying they're slowly chipping away at traditional values and replacing them with their own.
So it's like a gradual but very intentional process.
He argues that they've been incredibly successful, too. He points to things like no-fault divorce laws, the rise of single motherhood, and the increasing acceptance of, non-traditional families.
As evidence of their impact.
Right. He even goes so far as to say that the language we use has been co-opted.
Co-opted. How so?
Like words like patriarchy and toxic masculinity. He says those are used to demonize men and make them question their own instincts.
So it's like they're being brainwashed almost.
In a way, he's saying that men are being conditioned to see themselves as the problem, to apologize for their very existence, and to accept this new set of rules that puts them at a disadvantage.
Okay, so let's say Riker's right, and this long march has actually happened. What does he suggest we do about it?
He calls for a kind of awakening. He wants men to wake up to what he sees as the reality of this situation, to stop buying into the narratives that are being pushed on them, and to start reclaiming their masculinity.
So it's about taking back control.
Exactly. And he's not just talking about physical strength or anything like that. He sees it as reclaiming those traditionally masculine values, like leadership stoicism, protectiveness, providing for their family. He believes those are essential for men's happiness and fulfillment, and for a healthy society overall.
So it's about getting back to those core values.
And this is where his ideas about those covert contracts come back in. He's saying men need to be more aware of the unspoken agreements they're entering into, both in their relationships and in society as a whole.
To be more conscious of those dynamics.
Exactly. He encourages men to have open and honest conversations with their partners about their expectations and needs, and to renegotiate those contracts if they need to.
So it's about communication and setting clear boundaries.
And he even suggests that men need to be more assertive in pushing back against what he sees as, the feminist agenda.
To stand up for themselves.
To speak up against policies and ideas that they believe are harmful to men and to society as a whole. He's calling for a kind of masculine resistance movement.
Yeah.
pushback against what he sees as the excesses of feminism and a reassertion of those traditional values.
I can see how some people would find this message really empowering, while others might be a little alarmed by it.
Yeah.
It's definitely pushing some buttons.
Absolutely. And that's the power of a book like The Cunning Cuckoo, right? It's starting a conversation, challenging the status quo, and forcing us to confront some uncomfortable truths about gender relationships, the world we live in.
It's giving people a different lens to view the world through,
One that might resonate with those who feel like the current system isn't working for them.
especially those who identify with the men's rights movement.
Now, whether you agree with all of Raker's conclusions or not, I think we can all agree that he raises some valid points.
Yeah, even if you don't buy into that whole war on masculinity thing, there's definitely something to be said for being more mindful of those unspoken expectations in our relationships and being willing to have those tough conversations, right?
Absolutely. And it's important for men to feel like their voices are being heard and that their concerns are being taken seriously.
So if you're interested in checking out Riker's book and delving deeper into these ideas, you can find The Cunning Cuckoo on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
It's definitely a book that'll get you thinking and maybe even help you see the world in a new light.
And that's what the deep dive is all about, right? Helping you unpack these complex ideas, explore different perspectives, and ultimately make sense of the world around you. We'll be back soon with more deep dives into the topics that matter most to you.